What happens when the people you raised forget you? When the laughter that once filled a home disappears into silence? Before the hospital bed, before the machines, before the silence, there was a man who woke up every morning before the sun, not because he wanted to, but because responsibility didn't allow him to sleep in. His name was Walter Harris, and once upon a time he was a husband, a father, a man who gave everything. And one day he was all alone. The house on Maple Street was small, not much space for 5 people, but somehow it always felt full. Full of noise, full of movement, full of life. Walter would wake up to the sound of feet hitting the floor upstairs, someone laughing, someone arguing, someone yelling that they were late for school. He used to lie in bed for a few seconds longer, just listening. That sound meant everything was still okay. His wife, Evelyn, would already be in the kitchen. She always woke up earlier than everyone else, moving quietly so she wouldn't disturb the kids. Walter would come up behind her, wrap his arms around her and rest his chin on her shoulder. "Long day?" she asked. "They're all long days," he'd reply, smiling. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and for Walter that felt like wealth. Even in the small kitchen, the house hummed with life. The smell of coffee mingled with the scent of toast, and the chatter of the children drifting from their rooms made everything feel warmer. Plates were stacked for breakfast, jackets hung over chairs, and backpacks lay ready by the door. Every little corner told a story. The scribbled notes Michael left for his sister, Laura's carefully folded school papers, Andrew's sketches of faraway places. Walter watched them sometimes, quietly marveling at how messy, loud, and chaotic it all was. Each argument, each burst of laughter, each small act of kindness between the children built a rhythm only a home filled with love could hold. Even when things went wrong, spilled milk, forgotten homework, or shouted warnings, they were together. They belonged to one another, and that made the house feel bigger than it actually was. Cancer doesn't knock. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for the right moment. It arrives quietly, like a shadow stretching across a room, and before anyone realizes what's happening, it has already begun rearranging lives that once felt stable. Evelyn got sick fast. At first it was small things. She laughed a little less. She rested a little more. She waved off concern with a smile that said, "I'm fine." One month she was laughing in the kitchen, music playing softly as she cooked dinner. Her voice filled the house, light and familiar, the kind of sound that made everything feel safe. Walter could see Michael and Laura at the table, teasing each other over breakfast, while Andrew tried to sneak extra pancakes before anyone noticed. The clatter of spoons, the scrape of chairs, the little arguments over who got the last slice of bread, all of it made the small house feel alive, warm, and complete. For a moment everything felt normal, messy, loud, and full of life. The next month she was tired. Not the normal kind of tired. Not the kind sleep could fix. The kind that lived in her bones. She would sit down halfway through folding laundry. She would pause while walking from one room to another, hand resting on the wall as if the house itself was holding her up. The smell of her perfume still lingered faintly in the hallway, the quiet creak of the floors reminding Walter of the life that once filled the rooms. He noticed the little things, how her hands trembled slightly when carrying a plate of food, how she sometimes leaned on the counter a moment too long, eyes unfocused, lost in thought. The children's laughter no longer reached her in quite the same way, and Walter felt a pang every time Michael or Laura called out her name to get her attention. Walter noticed. He asked questions. She brushed them away. He tried to push his fear down, to keep it from showing in front of the kids. But at night, when the house finally grew quiet, he would sit in the living room and watch her from a distance, folding laundry, putting away dishes, moving slowly from room to room. He memorized the small gestures, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gentle hum of a song she could barely carry, the way her shoulders slumped ever so slightly as if carrying the weight of more than just herself. Then suddenly she was gone. There was no gentle transition, no slow goodbye. Just one hospital room, and then silence. Walter stood beside her bed, his hand wrapped around hers, feeling how cold it had become. The machines that once filled the room with sound slowed, then stopped. He glanced around the sterile room, noticing how empty it felt despite the beeping monitors, the curtains, and the faint scent of antiseptic. He thought of the kitchen at home, of the morning sunlight through the curtains, of Evelyn moving quietly as she made breakfast, of the children's laughter bouncing off the walls. That life felt like a memory already, fading before his eyes, even as he still held her hand. For a long moment, he didn't react. He just stared, as if staring hard enough could undo it, as if refusing to blink might give time a chance to rewind. He felt the pulse of emptiness settle around him, thick and heavy, pressing down on his chest. He thought of all the little things that made a house a home, the sound of Andrew's shoes hitting the floor as he ran to catch the school bus, Michael's early morning grumbles over cereal, Laura's quiet notes left on the fridge for no one in particular. All of it had vanished into silence now. The nurse spoke softly. The doctor said her name. Walter nodded. Not because he understood, but because he didn't know what else to do. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He didn't fall apart. He simply let go of her hand. And then he went home. The house felt wrong the moment he stepped inside. Too quiet. Too empty. That night, after the children finally fell asleep, Walter sat alone at the kitchen table. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it ever had before. 3 plates sat in front of him. Untouched. Unnecessary. He stared at them for a long time. At the empty chair across from him. At the space where Evelyn used to sit. He didn't move. He didn't eat. He just sat there, breathing, trying to understand how a full life could disappear so completely. That night, Walter Harris learned something he would carry for the rest of his life. That loneliness doesn't always come from being alone. Sometimes, it comes from losing the one person who made being alive feel shared. Grief didn't give him time. It didn't knock politely on the door. It didn't ask him to breathe. It didn't wait for the moments he could have paused. The children still needed breakfast. The laundry still needed washing, folded just the way they liked it. Bills still needed paying. The world didn't stop just because his heart had been broken. So Walter swallowed the pain. He tucked it deep inside himself, wrapped it in silence, and became something new. He became both mother and father. He became teacher, chef, nurse, chauffeur, and friend all in one. Some nights he stayed up until the house grew quiet, watching YouTube videos on how to braid hair. His fingers were clumsy at first, tangling strands until he swore softly under his breath, frustrated. But eventually he got it right. The braids weren't perfect, but the children smiled. That smile became worth all the mistakes. Dinner was a battlefield. He burned meals more often than he succeeded. The smell of charred vegetables sometimes filled the small kitchen, hanging in the air like a reminder of imperfection. Still, he persevered. He learned to laugh at mistakes. He learned to improvise. He learned to survive. He worked extra shifts, weekends, holidays, days that blurred into nights. He came home exhausted, hands raw from labor, back aching, yet he still made time for the children. He fixed scraped knees. He listened to stories about school. He reminded them, every chance he got, that he was proud. And when the house finally fell silent, when the children had drifted into sleep, he would sit on the edge of their beds. He would watch them breathe. He would memorize the little details, the curl of a hairline, the softness of a hand, the way a mouth twitched when dreaming. Sometimes he touched their foreheads just to feel the warmth. Sometimes he whispered softly, "I love you," even though they were asleep. And in those moments, Walter felt everything he had lost, everything he had carried, everything he had fought for. He thought about Evelyn. He thought about the life he had hoped to give his children. And he thought about the emptiness that could never truly be filled. He made a promise to himself. Not out loud, not to anyone. I won't let them feel what I feel. He repeated it like a prayer, like a shield. And every morning, he carried it with him. Every shift, every burnt dinner, every clumsy braid, it became proof. Proof that love could exist even in exhaustion, even in loss, even in grief. Because that was his duty. Because that was his heart. Because that was what being a father meant. Michael was 12 when his mother died. 12 years old, old enough to understand that something had gone terribly wrong, too young to process the depth of loss. Walter noticed the change immediately. Michael stopped asking for things he used to want. He stopped bothering with small requests. He stopped leaving notes on the fridge. Instead, he tried to act grown. He tried to act strong. He pretended everything was fine, even when it was. Sometimes Walter would catch him standing by the window, staring out at the driveway. His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched into fists. He looked like he was holding the entire world on his own, and Walter felt a pang in his chest every time he saw it. One night, Walter was folding laundry in the living room when he heard it. A sound so small it almost disappeared into the house. A quiet, muffled sound he recognized immediately. Michael. Crying. Not loudly. Not openly. No sobs. No wails. Just soft, broken breaths slipping through the cracks of a closed bedroom door, like someone trying very hard not to be heard. Walter's hands froze around a half-folded shirt. The house was already quiet, but somehow the silence grew heavier. Thicker. As if it were holding its breath too. He stood there for a moment, listening. Every instinct in him screamed to rush in. To open the door. To pull his son into his arms. But he didn't. Because he saw it, the fragile walls Michael had built around himself. The careful way his son tried to be strong. The way grief had taught him to hide instead of ask. Walter didn't want to shatter that. So he walked slowly to the door. He lowered himself to the floor outside Michael's room, his back resting against the wall, knees drawn close to his chest. And he said nothing. Minutes passed. Long, aching minutes that stretched into something unbearable. The clock in the hallway ticked louder than it ever had before. The heater hummed softly. A newspaper on the table shifted as warm air moved through the room. Normal sounds. Too normal for a house that had lost its center. Michael's breathing wavered on the other side of the door. Walter closed his eyes. He stayed. Not speaking. Not moving. Just staying. Because sometimes presence matters more than words. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Michael's voice broke through the silence. Small. Unsteady. Barely holding together. Dad, are we going to be okay? The question hit Walter like a physical blow. Not because he didn't expect it, but because he knew how much weight it carried. Walter didn't hesitate. He didn't pause to weigh honesty against mercy. Didn't search for the right answer. He reached deep past his own grief, past his fear, past the truth he didn't fully understand himself. And he whispered firmly, with every ounce of certainty he could force into his voice. We already are. The words hung there. Fragile. Powerful. And in that moment, the lie became a shield. A shield Michael could hide behind. A shield strong enough to carry him through childhood. strong enough to let him laugh again, to focus in school again, to sleep without the weight of loss crushing his chest every night. Walter stayed there long after the question faded, listening to Michael's breathing, listening as it slowly steadied, listening to the rise and fall of his chest through the wall. Walter felt his own chest tighten. He knew grief would never leave him, knew it would follow him quietly for the rest of his life. But for now, his son needed hope, even if that hope was built on a lie. When Michael finally drifted into sleep, the crying replaced by soft, even breaths, Walter pushed himself up from the floor. Carefully, quietly, as if making any sound might undo the fragile peace he had just created. He walked down the hallway and returned to his own room. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, head in his hands, carrying a promise he never spoke aloud. That he would always be there, that he would hold the line, that he would carry the pain so his children wouldn't have to. Years later, Michael would remember that night. Not the lie, but the feeling, the safety, the quiet courage, the certainty that someone was standing guard outside his door. And somehow, that single moment would shape him more than any lecture, any punishment, or any lesson ever could. Because sometimes the strongest love doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers in the dark. And in that whispered silence, Walter Harris became everything Michael needed. Laura was different. She never cried in front of anyone. When her mother died, she didn't scream or fall apart. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask for comfort. Instead, she stayed busy. If dishes needed washing, Laura did them. If the house was messy, she cleaned it. If Walter forgot to eat, Laura reminded him. She became helpful in a way that felt adult. Too adult. Walter noticed that Laura stopped asking for things. No new clothes. No special requests. No complaints. When something hurt her, she swallowed it. Walter would sometimes find her late at night, sitting on the edge of her bed with the lights off. Not crying, just staring. When he asked if she was okay, she always answered the same way. "I'm fine, Dad." She said it softly, convincingly. But Walter knew better. He worried that Laura felt everything too deeply and carried it alone. Worried she was protecting everyone else while quietly breaking herself. Worried that one day she would feel unseen, even by him. So he learned to watch her carefully. He didn't force conversations. Didn't push questions. He showed up in small ways. A cup of tea left on her desk. A blanket folded at the foot of her bed. A quiet "I'm here" said without words. And Laura grew strong. Quietly, silently, carrying more than anyone ever realized. Andrew was the youngest, and he never stayed still. Even after his mother died, even when the house grew quiet, Andrew kept moving, packing from room to room, staring out windows, asking questions no one was ready to answer. Why do people leave? Why do things change? Do you think there's more than this? His eyes were always searching for something beyond the walls of their small home, beyond the neighborhood, beyond the life he could see. His mind wandered constantly. While Michael learned responsibility and Laura learned silence, Andrew learned to dream. He talked about places he wanted to visit, things he wanted to build, lives he wanted to live. Walter listened, sometimes with a smile, sometimes with quiet fear, because Andrew's restlessness reminded him of Evelyn. That same spark, that same brightness, the way she could light up a room without even trying. Walter loved that about Andrew. Loved it fiercely. He never wanted to dim that light. but loving it didn't make it less frightening. Late at night, Andrew would sit at the kitchen table, books spread out, drawing plans that made no sense to anyone but him. Maps, ideas, imagined futures. Walter would pass by and ask, "What are you working on?" Andrew would grin. "Something big." Walter nodded. "Of course you are." When Andrew talked about leaving town one day, about chasing dreams Walter could barely imagine, Walter didn't stop him. He didn't warn him, didn't guilt him. He just listened and smiled. The years passed quickly. Too quickly. Life blurred. Days folded into nights. Weeks into months. Months into years. School became college. College became careers. Careers became distance. And in that distance, the house grew quieter with every passing day. Walter stood in driveways, watching cars disappear down the street, feeling the weight of every goodbye like a stone pressing on his chest. He stood in airports, shoulders tense, pretending he wasn't counting the days, the hours, the minutes until the next visit, pretending he wasn't imagining conversations that would never come. At first, the calls were frequent. The laughter, the stories, the chaos, they filled his days with warmth. Then they texted. Quick notes, emojis, brief updates. Conversations became shorter. Connections became lighter. Eventually, updates replaced conversations entirely. A photograph of a promotion. A snapshot of a new apartment. A message that said, "I'm busy, Dad." Walter told himself it was normal. He told himself it was the natural rhythm of life. He told himself he was proud of the people they had become. He told himself loneliness was part of parenting. And sometimes it worked. But other times, he felt the hollow ache of absence in his chest, the quiet weight of moments shared only in memory, the echo of laughter that no longer filled the rooms. He folded it away, tucked it inside, and kept moving forward. Because that was what fathers do. Even when the heart longs for more. Time passed, holidays changed. The laughter that once filled the house grew quieter each year. The smells of turkey, of cinnamon and pine, of cookies baked together. They lingered, but only as echoes. Thanksgiving was postponed. A message saying, "Sorry, Dad, we'll see you next week." Next week stretched into months. Christmas became next year. The tree went up, then stayed undecorated. Lights flickered faintly in the window, silent reminders of celebrations past. Birthdays were remembered days late. A text, a photo, a rushed phone call. Walter smiled when he read them. He pretended it was enough. He never complained. He told neighbors, friends, anyone who asked. "They're busy, that's good, means they're doing well." He said it so often that even he began to believe it. At night, he sat alone in Evelyn's old chair. It still carried the faint scent of her perfume. The cushion was soft and worn, molded to the shape of the person who had once filled it with warmth. Walter would close his eyes and replay memories like old movies, Evelyn laughing in the kitchen, the children fighting over board games, quiet nights reading stories together. Sometimes he spoke out loud. Not because anyone was there to answer, but because he needed a voice in the house. A voice that reminded him he was still alive. A voice that broke the silence, if only for a moment. He whispered into the dark, "I remember, I love you, I see you." And the house held his words gently, as if carrying them for him until someone could hear them again. By the time Walter turned 75, his world had shrunk. A smaller house. A quieter phone. Longer nights. But still he waited. Waited for calls. Waited for visits. Waited for proof that everything he gave hadn't disappeared into the past. He never imagined how alone he would be at the end. Walter Harris spent his life showing up for others, never realizing that one day no one would show up for him. Distance doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in slowly, quietly, disguised as growth, success, and independence. By the time you notice it, it has already settled comfortably between people who once couldn't live a day without each other. For Walter Harris, distance didn't sound like rejection. It sounded like, "I'll call you back." At first, Walter didn't notice the shift. Michael's calls became shorter, still warm but rushed. Laura's voice carried lists, things to do, places to be. Andrew's messages were cheerful but brief, emojis replacing words. Walter adapted. He learned not to call during work hours. He learned not to ask too many questions. He learned to keep stories short, so no one would feel trapped. Every time the phone rang, his heart lifted. Every time it didn't, he told himself tomorrow would be better. Michael was the first to leave town, and the first to disappear emotionally. Success had found him early. A good job, promotions, meetings that never seemed to end. Walter admired that. When Michael called, Walter made sure to sound proud, never needy. "How work, son?" "Busy, Dad, you know how it is." Walter did know. What Michael didn't know was that his father rehearsed conversations before dialing, just to avoid awkward silences. One night, Michael missed a promised call. Walter stayed awake until midnight, phone resting on his chest, volume turned all the way up. The call never came. The next morning, Michael texted, "Sorry, Dad, long day." Walter typed back, "No worries, proud of you." He deleted what he almost sent. I waited. Laura believed she was doing the right thing. She sent money regularly. She asked about doctor visits. She told friends her father was doing fine. But she rarely came home. Travel was inconvenient. Life was expensive. Time was limited. When Walter mentioned feeling tired, she reassured him. "You've always been strong, Dad." He smiled at the phone, even though she couldn't see it. Strength had become a burden he didn't know how to put down. On her birthday, Walter mailed a handwritten card. Weeks later, she texted, "Just found this, thank you, Dad." He read it 3 times, then placed the card back in the envelope and put it away. Andrew was the youngest. He had left home years ago, built his own life and started his own business. Walter called one evening, hopping to hear his son's voice. "Hey, Dad," Andrew said, brisk but warm. "I'm busy right now, business." Then, almost joking, he added, "You should get Netflix, Dad, keep yourself busy." Walter smiled faintly, feeling both pride and emptiness. He let it go, because a boy who dreams must be allowed to fly, and a father must learn to watch from afar. Rooms went unused. Michael's old room collected dust. Laura's childhood bookshelf stayed untouched. Andrew's posters peeled slowly from the walls. Walter cleaned less. What was the point? He ate dinner alone, often standing by the sink, not bothering with plates. He talked to Evelyn's photograph more than he talked to anyone else. Sometimes he caught himself setting out extra chairs, then quietly putting them back. One morning Walter got out of bed. Walter's chest pain started subtly. A tightness, a heaviness, a shortness of breath he ignored. He mentioned it casually during a call. Michael suggested he see a doctor. Laura offered to schedule one. Andrew said, "You'll be fine, Dad." Walter nodded to himself. He didn't go. Some part of him believed that if he got sick enough, someone would come. That belief would cost him everything. Thanksgiving came and went. Walter cooked a full meal anyway. He ate slowly, deliberately, pretending the house was full. Christmas was worse. He sat in the dark living room, tree lights blinking silently, phone beside him. No calls, no video chats, just silence. He fell asleep in his chair before midnight. One evening, Walter dropped his phone. It slid across the floor, screen cracking slightly. He stared at it. For the first time, he wondered what would happen if it stopped working completely. Who would notice? Who would miss him first? The answer terrified him. The pain finally won. Walter collapsed in his kitchen, knocking over a chair as he fell. The sound echoed through the empty house. No one heard it. Hours later, a neighbor checked in. The ambulance came. And for the first time, Walter was surrounded by people who didn't know his name, but noticed his pain. Distance didn't take Walter's children away all at once. It took them one unanswered call at a time. Hospitals have a way of stripping life down to its essentials. A bed, a machine, a body that can no longer pretend it's strong. Walter Harris lay in room 417, staring at a ceiling so white it felt endless. The heart monitor beside him beeped steadily, not urgently, not reassuringly, just enough to remind him that time was still passing. He didn't know how many days he'd been there. Time worked differently now. The first night was the hardest. Pain made sleep impossible. The unfamiliar sounds of the hospital echoed through the hall, footsteps, rolling carts, distant voices calling names that weren't his. Every sound was sharper than it should have been, each one a reminder of how alone he truly was. Walter kept turning his head toward the door. Every time it opened, his heart jumped. Every time it closed without anyone entering, something inside him tightened. He reached for his phone. His fingers trembled as he pressed Michael's name. It rang. Once, twice. Then voicemail. Walter swallowed and spoke slowly. "Hey son, it's Dad. I'm in the hospital. I don't want to worry you, but I'd really like to see you." He ended the call and stared at the screen. Waiting. Nothing. He called Laura. Laura answered on the third ring. "Dad, what's wrong?" Her voice was concerned, but distant. "I'm in the hospital," he said quietly. "They're running tests." A pause. "Oh, is it serious?" "I don't know." Another pause, longer this time. "I can help with the bills," she said gently. "Just let me know what you need." Walter nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Okay," he said. The call ended. Money arrived the next morning. Laura did not. He called Andrew. Andrew didn't answer. Walter sent a text instead. "I'm in the hospital. I could really use you." The message showed delivered. Walter stared at it until his eyes burned. He placed the phone face down on the bed. Waiting became his full-time job. Waiting for footsteps, waiting for the door to open, waiting for his name to be called, not by a nurse, but by someone who loved him. Other patients had visitors. He watched sons lean over beds, daughters bring food, grandchildren laugh too loudly. He turned his head toward the wall when it became too much. Doctors spoke in careful tones. They used words like manageable, monitoring, and comfort. Walter listened, nodding politely. He didn't ask many questions. Part of him believed that asking made things real. His phone became heavier each day. He checked it constantly, even when there were no notifications. Once it buzzed. His heart raced. It was a spam message. He laughed softly, then stopped. 3 days in, Walter tried again. Michael didn't answer. Laura texted later. "I'm swamped this week, we'll talk soon." Andrew sent a thumbs-up emoji. Walter stared at it for a long time. He placed the phone on the table beside his bed and stopped reaching for it as often. Nights were the worst. Pain meds dulled his body but sharpened his thoughts. He replayed moments over and over. Teaching Michael to drive. Laura's graduation smile. Andrew's laughter filling the house. He wondered when those moments stopped being enough. Late one night, Walter whispered into the darkness. Did I do something wrong? No one answered. There was a chair beside his bed. It stayed empty. Walter imagined his children sitting there. He imagined conversations that would never happen. He imagined apologies he would never hear. Eventually, he stopped imagining. It hurt less that way. On the fifth day, Walter realized something quietly. No one was coming. The realization didn't arrive dramatically. It settled in slowly, like exhaustion. He turned his phone off. Walter Harris didn't lose hope all at once. It faded quietly, the same way his voice had faded from his children's lives. Some people pass through our lives without leaving a mark. Others arrive when the world is already falling apart, and somehow they become the reason it doesn't collapse completely. For Walter Harris, that person was a nurse named Emily. Emily noticed him because he always said, "Thank you." Even when the pain was bad. Even when sleep never came. Even when no one visited. She noticed because the chair beside his bed stayed empty. Every day. While other patients complained, Walter apologized. "I'm sorry to bother you," he'd say, even when he could barely breathe. Emily had worked in hospitals long enough to recognize loneliness. This wasn't ordinary loneliness. This was abandonment. One evening, after her shift officially ended, Emily didn't leave. She pulled the chair closer and sat down. "Do you want company?" she asked gently. Walter hesitated, then nodded. They sat in silence at first. The comfortable kind. The kind that doesn't demand anything. Eventually, Walter spoke. "My wife used to sit there." Emily didn't rush him. "What was her name?" "Evelyn." He smiled. She had the loudest laugh. Emily smiled back. That night, Walter slept better than he had in days. From then on, Emily stayed longer during her shifts. She brought warm blankets. She adjusted his pillows just right. She remembered how he liked his water, not too cold. She asked about his children. Walter talked carefully, defensively. "They're busy," he said. "They're good kids." Emily didn't argue. She just listened. Sometimes that was enough. One night the pain was worse than usual. Walter gripped the bed rails, tears filling his eyes. Emily held his hand. "I raised them alone," he whispered. "I gave them everything." His voice broke. "I didn't think this would be how it ends." Emily squeezed his hand tighter. "You mattered," she said. "You still do." Walter cried quietly. Not from pain. From relief. That night, Walter asked for his phone. Emily helped him hold it steady. He typed slowly. "I don't think I have much time left. I just want to see you once more." The message showed read. No reply. Walter stared at the screen. Then gently handed the phone to Emily. "I think I'm done waiting," he said. Rain tapped softly against the window. The hospital grew quiet. Emily sat beside him, holding his hand. "You're not alone," she whispered. Walter smiled faintly. In his mind, he wasn't in a hospital. He was back in his old house. The kitchen full. The laughter loud. He took one slow breath. Then another. Then none. The monitor went still. Emily stayed. The nurse had called the children. She told them he had passed in the night. She explained, she begged, she told them to come quickly. First thing in the morning, they arrived. Well-dressed, quiet, unprepared. The room felt empty. Emily watched from the doorway. None of them noticed the chair. None of them asked who had been there at the end. None of them knew the love that had stayed with him until his very last breath. Some parents die surrounded by family, and some die surrounded by silence. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartfelt stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Let us know in the comment where you are watching from.